Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Welborn, and this is Faith Baptist Church Sunday School. We are wrapping up our study in Matthew 24. We've been looking at it over the past few weeks. It's the Olivet Discourse. It's whenever Jesus had been in the temple, had left the temple, and this is just prior to the week of his crucifixion, but he had been in the temple, and he and his disciples had left, went up on a hillside, basically overlooking Jerusalem, and it was the Mount of Olives, and it was an old olive grove. Also, a cemetery was up there. A cemetery was going to be later, but at that point, it was a big olive grove. Olive oil, olives were a big part of the Middle Eastern culture, still are. And so that hillside there, Jesus stops and talks to his disciples, and they ask him questions. And so it's a discussion. And he wraps it up here by talking about the end of the age, and we've been looking at, and earlier in Matthew 24, the rapture. Basically, it doesn't mention the rapture, but you can see the tribulation and then the second coming of Christ, the second advent of Christ. We talked about how that is separate from the rapture. The rapture, Jesus will not come down to earth, but he will call us up to him, and at the end of the tribulation, the 7 years, he will have his return to earth. It's the second returning, the second advent, the first advent being Christmas. So a little bit of a recap. Just wanted to cover that. But Jesus then goes on to say about basically how the people will be in the end times. And he goes back to talk about what it's going to be like before the rapture. And he talks about how people are just going to be pretty much indifferent. And they were going to be like whenever before the flood, how people were in the days of Noah. He mentioned that earlier in a few passages. But Matthew 24, verses 42 through 44, we'll start with verse 42 and go through the end of the chapter. But he talks about, therefore, be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. But know this, if a homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you should also be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not know. Let's put it into a different perspective. Let's say your house, somebody popping in or coming over, and they come to the front door and you're not expecting company. If you know people are coming over, you're going to have your house just perfect. If you're not, then it's just going to be like it looks like every day when you live in it. It can be embarrassing when people come over. It's if anybody I know, my son with his friends is kind of like, okay, we're going to come over, go to a friend's house, that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, okay, do the parents know? And are they ready? Is the house clean? If you've ever, also sporting events, if you've ever stuck it out to the end of a sporting event and been faithful at the end, and seen things change, scores change. I know in the playoffs when the Rams were playing Tampa Bay, and at the end, it looked like Tom Brady was doing his usual comeback. And I got frustrated, and I thought, okay, I'm just done. I'm done. And my son was watching the game at another location, and so we were texting, and I just cut the game off. I thought, I'm just done. I didn't stick it out, but he stuck it out to the end, and he texted me and said, turn it back on. Go back and look. The Rams are winning, and ultimately the Rams won that game, and then they went on to the Super Bowl. But life is like that with us. Jesus was using an example with his disciples. They didn't have alarm systems back then. I guess maybe they might have had like a donkey or a dog or something that could make noise. But people didn't know whenever somebody was going to come in and steal and break in. Then you don't prepare for that. You don't think, okay, next Saturday. So Matthew 24, verses 45 through 47. Who then is faithful and a wise servant, whom his master has put in charge of his household, to give them food at a proper time? Blessed is the servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. This sounds very familiar if you were where Jesus said, for much is given, much will be required. Whenever I read this passage, that immediately came into my mind. That's in the next chapter, chapter 25, where Jesus is continuing to talk about believers and responsibility that we have. And just like unexpectedly something happens at your home, he compares it again to, he goes on with that analogy of using the master in the household and the servants. The servants are, I mean, some were either hired or paid, Also, some were basically working off previous wages, a debt, and so almost like a slave servant back then. So you had different levels of servants. It wasn't their house. They basically could do what they wanted to do, of course, in risk of punishment. But if you felt like, okay, I could get things taken care of because the master won't be back for another week, and then the master comes back early and sees how people were acting, that's what Jesus was talking about here. Same thing with our world, same thing with our lives. Jesus is coming back. The rapture is going to happen. That's going to set off the 7 years and then his return to earth at the end of those 7 years. And so once those 7 years start, it's too late. It's the clock has started back again, and you're moving on. And people can still accept Christ after that, but it's a lot more difficult. It's 7 years of just torture on earth. And it really is something that for us as believers, we need to be thinking about. We don't know when Christ is coming back. I know over the years, way back in the past, people thought it could be imminent. I mentioned before during World War I, pandemics, smallpox outbreaks. I know right now there's another talk of smallpox, monkeypox type thing. But these things, these rumors of wars and pestilence and those things are mentioned in the Bible, not specifically, but there's going to be times like that prior to Christ's return. So we have signs. We can see things are happening. I mentioned last week there was, or actually 2 weeks ago, really, where signs and wonders in the sky. This past week, the U.S. government actually had a conference talking about unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. They don't call them UFOs now, UAPs. And they were analyzing them and saying, well, these are real. We need to take them seriously. They could be foreign governments, and then there's some things we just can't explain. So, wow, could it be demonic activity confusing people, things in the sky? And the U.S. government is even looking at it saying, we don't know what it is. Again, signs and wonders in the sky. We see the warning signs. A lot of the world does not. A lot of the world just goes about its day thinking, okay, as long as my cell phone has a charge, as long as I have Wi-Fi, I'm good. And that's pretty much the height of existence for a lot of people. And it's sad to see that. There's so much more that for us as believers, we can witness and tell people about that hope that we have. So the servants there, let's contrast with the wicked servant as we're heading into the end of the lesson here this morning, short lesson. Matthew 24, verses 48 through 51. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eat and drinks with drunkards, and that servant's master will come on the day that he does not expect him, in the hour that he does not know. He will cut him into pieces and assign him into a place with hypocrites, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So cut him into pieces, you think, okay, is he going to chop him up and then throw him into people? No, basically he's talking about this whipping, the beating of the wicked servant. And that's the way a lot of people are with life. They have no care. And this is not talking about Christians. When he talks about servants, he's talking about people that have been placed on the earth. We're stewards of the earth. One of the things that motivates me to be good to the earth is that God has placed us in a role of being a steward of the earth. So I'm not saying, I'm not getting political, but I'm just saying it's nice to take care of the earth. You know, don't throw stuff out the window. Don't litter, those sort of things. It's very minor. I don't want to get off on the squirrel trail here, or rabbit trail, squirrel. See, that's what happens. But anyway, the stewards that God has placed here on the earth is the population of the earth. Jesus is referring to the first group of stewards as believers. The second group that he's referring to are people that don't trust in Christ, that are just living life however. And when he talks about they'll be placed into with the hypocrites, and where there's gnashing of teeth and weeping, that's in reference to hell. Hell is a real place. Heaven is a real place. Heaven is where us as believers, once you accept Christ, that's our destination. Hell is for the unbelievers and the people who reject Christ, who ultimately do not accept Christ. And so Jesus is saying that, the first group that accepted Christ, that are looking for his return, and then you have the second group that just, they don't care. And they're taking advantage of people, and they're living life in a very wicked way. So, Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, this is the wrap-up of that chapter. Next week, we'll look in Matthew 25, and then we'll go into a whole different study after Matthew 25. Hope you guys have a great week. By the way, tip of the week, make sure and air up your tires. You get better gas mileage if your tires are inflated at a higher rate. Just don't go over 40 PSI. But anyway, just wanted to put that out there. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.